Well, hello there, everyone. It's been a little while since all three of us has been here. Steve and I did kind of like a fake check-in for a while, so several meals, several good sleeps, but it's finally time again for some tennis. Joining me as always is Steve, but he was here last time. Candace, how are you? How have you been? Let the folks know how everything's going.
I'm trying to figure out if you called me fat or something. Like, how many meals do you think I
No, just a
had
time
since I've been away? How many meals did I have?
3 or so a day. I don't know. Maybe you're like a small meal person, 5 a day.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten into
Well,
that.
I'm good. I'm glad to be back. I missed you guys.
Oh, it's good to have you back. How are you, Steve? I know it's early where you are.
I'm good. It's 4:30 in the morning, and I've had 2 meals already, so I'm doing well.
We like it. Well, we're all good. We're ready to go. Let's jump in. We've got tournaments in Miami, the men, the women. We're going to do both here at the same time. I know a lot of times we split the show up. They're all in the same place. We've got the men that are actually starting at about 24 or so hours the first round. The women are actually just getting underway now. But we'll start with the men's draw. First quarter there. You see Medvedev at the top, Bautista good at the bottom. Some interesting names in the middle. I know a lot has been made of who's not here, but there's some tennis players here, and we have some tennis. I mean, I don't know, Candace, were you pretty bummed that everybody left? I mean, is this good enough field, or should we just skip all this and go right to the women?
I mean, it's always a bummer when the big names don't play. This field is still plenty good, but is it what we've seen in vintage editions of this tournament? No. And you wonder if it's a bit of a reflection of Indian Wells, obviously being postponed this year once again. I think that was a double that people obviously would do both of. So maybe it's just not as appealing to make the long journey out to Miami, of all places, during spring break, if that's the only tournament you have.
And this year with travel restrictions, obviously, like you said, with that Indian Wells, you're kind of coming here for a week or two. Some people probably just for a match or two, and then bouncing somewhere else. So, maybe it doesn't make total sense. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, look, I agree. I mean, you said that the big names aren't here, but I see John Isner, I see Riley Opelka, I see some big names there. I know Ivo Karlovic.
All the Russians are here. We got all three of the Russians. That's pretty good.
But yeah, look, it's certainly not
Canadians.
It's not the level that we've come to expect in previous years. But that being said, that it's a good opportunity for a number of these players to get a pretty decent chunk of ranking points. And look, you know that there's a chance to snag a couple of ranking points when Jensen Liu finds his way into a draw.
This is true. So let's start actually taking a look again. The first quarter, some big names here, kind of top and bottom. Some interesting names in the middle. I'll go back to you here, Candace. What do you see in this first quarter? How do you see all this kind of shaking out?
I mean, of course, when you first look, you are drawn straight to Medvedev, and he's tricky, right? We know obviously what he's capable of, and it was very, very impressive when we saw him down in Australia. Even though he was losing the final to Djokovic, he played incredibly well there. But then you had Rotterdam, and I know that court can be kind of tricky, but very tamely went out there. Then he's refound his form since, so it's a little bit up in the air what to expect from him now, given the state of this tournament. Does he have to play the form or at the level that we saw him at in Melbourne to win this? Probably not. But I do think he has a tricky little section. I'm really drawn to Feliciano Lopez in this spot, playing potentially Popperin first round. Then you'd get Riley Opelka, which he should be able to handle him. And then, of course, he'd go against Medvedev, and that's the big matchup. But the two of them have had some close battles over the years. Not unsurprising, I suppose, given Feliciano Lopez's style and his serve. Obviously, I mean, maybe not what it once was a number of years ago, but still is very good. And I thought that he's kind of gotten himself into a decent start to the year. He had a couple of decent matches over in Melbourne, maybe went down fairly tamely to Rublev, but you expect that at this stage. The defeat to Tsonga is not ideal, but he still didn't play terribly. And, losing to Kekmanovic, well, he's been playing really well, so I can live with that. So, on this particular court, somebody like a Feliciano Lopez, just given his game and his style, is of interest to me because he's going to be just insane odds and you know you're going to get a couple of matches in here where he's going to be a dog. So I'm drawn to him at the top portion here. The bottom is, I mean, who knows? It's much more chaotic, I suppose, when you start to work your way through to the bottom. You see Felix in there. I like Pospisil to make it through that kind of upper portion of their section in there, but that I see much more chaos, I think, underneath. Maybe that sounds crazy though, if I'm picking Feliciano Lopez on top. So perhaps that's not an apt description. I just suppose I would say I have more confidence in his ability to win a couple of matches together in that top portion than I do in any other singular individual towards the bottom. But I'll go with Pospisil as maybe the most likely.
That's it. That's an interesting take. I like that. How about you, Steve? How do you see this shaking out?
I mean, the only match in this quarter that I'm interested in is Jensen Lu versus Sam Querrey, and I feel like that's at an ATP Masters 1000 in 2021. What more could you want with the winner to play Medvedev? Look, I'm generally, and when I'm working my way through kind of outright previews at the moment, that's the thing with Medvedev. He is such a short price, so you either kind of figure out a way to kind of avoid him, I guess, in the first couple of rounds and look elsewhere. I think here, it's hard. Felix, you can't really trust him at the moment. I don't think, when you get to late in tournaments, so maybe look down to the bottom. And, I know we've got the draw up there. Andy Murray's withdrawn, so that'll be a qualifier or a lucky loser there that, maybe you think does open things up a little bit for, Bautista Agut at the bottom. Struff hasn't been playing well. Isner was borderline horrific last week in Mexico and just looked incredibly rusty. And you can maybe make a case that Bautista Agut could make a little bit of a run here, but there's no one that's really jumping out as a particularly exciting spot, I think, to really strongly attack.
Yeah, it's hard to pick. I mean, you've got FAA down there in the bottom, Bautista Agut. Even Isner has actually made some deep runs here at this tournament. Has kind of a home court feeling for him. So you've got those three together. You've got Medvedev there at the top. I agree that as you're looking at this draw and you're trying to attack it, I think we are going to find some value in the outright market simply because I think, Medvedev is the huge favorite here is not the correct price. As I start to look at some other names, he looks like a really easy favorite to oppose. And it's just hard to pick out, who kind of comes out of that bottom section. So I'll probably just wait till that individual match versus placing an outright. But I think you guys are right to start to look at ways to, try to fade Medvedev as we go along.
And it might be a case of, if you do have access to quarter winner markets, to try and pick someone out of that bottom half. So like Candace said, with a Pospisil or Felix or someone, to be able to kind of get to a point where, you've got a decent outright spot there that won't be meeting, Medvedev potentially until the final match of that resulting bet.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But
all right, guys.
I know he hasn't been playing well, but I'm interested to see how some of these big servers go, like Riley Opelka in these conditions. That it is a slower hard court, but that's not necessarily the worst thing for some of those really, really big servers and really big strikers of the ball.
Yeah, because they can hit through it where other players are going to struggle to do that, right?
I mean, for me, that's the logic with Lopez. I think the guys with the big serve, that's the way that you want to look in here.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about that on slower courts, but the logic makes sense, again, especially given the conditions. All right, I think that just about wraps up the first quarter. So unless you guys have anything else, we can jump into the second quarter as soon as Steve figures out how to get the next slide up. He's rusty.
It's been a while.
Hey, there we go. Again, second quarter here, as we start to look, Zverev on the top there, coming off his win in Mexico. I got to wear the big hat. I love the big hat. That's my favorite. Goffin down there at the bottom. Steve, what do you see here in the second quarter? How do you see this shaking out?
I see myself wanting to get involved somehow in the second the second half of this quarter. I haven't figured out yet how I'm going to do it. It's not going to be with Dimitrov. He's disappointed me too much. I don't think it's going to be with Goffin. Maybe it's Taylor Fritz with that first round bye and a decent draw. I would have loved to have seen Kashanov a little bit further away from Zverev. I think looking at this overall draw, I think it's a pretty decent one for Zverev coming off that tournament win last week. But look, you can make a case that maybe the biggest threat to Zverev in this quarter is the winner of Kashanov and Sinner, which would be that. What are we working into the fourth round there? Is it? I'm pretty happy to not be too strongly in the corner of Basilashvili, even with that tournament win recently. And outside of that, I don't think there's a lot of names that are really standing out. How about you guys?
Yeah, I actually. So again, if I was making odds for this myself, I'd have Zverev as the favorite to win this tournament. I think this quarter is very winnable to him. He's had success here. I think he has a really nice game. Again, if he wins this quarter, maybe Medvedev's there, maybe it's whoever survives the bottom section. But I think he's kind of a favorite the rest of the way through. So I really like this section for Zverev. I agree that I'd want to attack the bottom section. I kind of wish that Sinner or Khachanov were down there, but this is what we got. What do you think, Candace?
I'm definitely in a very similar boat. I do have Sinner taking out Zverev, but I very much wish that he had been on the bottom portion. So you'd have to wait a little bit longer to go against him because this bottom portion, I'm trying to find something that's not too mean to say. It's not Masters 1000 level quality. And maybe that's being a little bit kind.
All that was missing was Query and Lou.
I have Tommy Paul going through, so yikes.
Yeah. I have Fritz, but you don't feel great about anybody in that
yeah,
section.
I'm not saying go out there and bet Tommy Paul. It's just it shows you what you're dealing with in that section. More confidence towards the top. I know you guys like Zverev. I like Sinner. I do think the slower conditions should suit him. And I do find him, even though given his age, I do find him a little bit more reliable to give me consistent performances. Zverev, when you get away from the majors, can get a little wonkety with his level. So I'll go Sinner out of this section, but it's clearly down to the two of them.
Yeah.
Just touching on what you said there, Candace, and then, with Alex and I thinking more so Fritz and you thinking Paul, that's what makes this section so frustrating, I think, is that there is such pockets of, I guess, weakness compared to other parts of the draw. Yet the two players that we're gravitating towards, if Tommy Paul wins his first round, he's facing Fritz in the second round. It's where it gets a little bit frustrating here when you look at it and you go, if you put Tommy Paul pretty much any other spot here, it just becomes a whole lot more enticing, whether it's a, sit and wait. And, in a way, if you're on Fritz, you probably want Tommy Paul to lose to Giron in that first round, but it just shows this draw that there are little pockets of strength. You look at Khachanov and Sinner, you'd probably take that over some of the other pockets of seeds here.
If Dimitrov has anything left at all, he should kind of move through this section, but hard to count on that happening. So such is life. The draw giveth, the draw taketh. So I think it is definitely Zverev or Sinner. So we'll see how that goes. Any other thoughts, guys, before we jump into the third?
No, I'm happy to jump on, and I've already got it up on the screen. Look at me go.
I love it. Diego Schwartzman there at the top. One of the aforementioned Russians, Rublev down there at the bottom. Some more interesting names here. There's this Karatsev guy that I don't know too much about. People have been much a titter about him. Candace, do you have any thoughts on this? What is it, Aslan? Like a Game of Thrones character.
Apparently he's like the star of 2021. I've had some Twitter comments, and maybe at the beginning of the year didn't give him his credit, and he's been playing very, very well. So well that I think he wins the tournament. I think that this section is very tame. Schwartzman doesn't concern me all that much. I feel like all these tournaments we're constantly picking the other seeds who are in Schwartzman's quarters. And so No different from that for mine. I mean, what is Karantsev's potential path? Like Kukushkin or Purcell? Then you're looking at maybe like Fognini. I mean, it's just not, there's not much there that is terribly troubling if he plays anywhere at the level. We've seen from him in 2 out of his 3, I think he's played 3 tournaments this year. Well, in Melbourne or just the other week in Dubai. If he plays anywhere close to those levels, this should be a cupcake of a quarter for him. And he should be very, very, very happy with his draw because, you know, we talked about soft pockets in other portions of the draw.
Yeah.
This is a pretty soft quarter comparatively.
Yeah, it is. There's a different name that I have picked here, but I'll let you jump in, Steve. Who do you see coming out of the third?
This just looks like a half of a kind of substandard ATP 500 clay court tournament. I get, and look, Karatsev, I do agree with Candace here. I think when you look, you know, he's obviously playing, you know, since the tour resumed post-COVID, it's just nice to see him play with an actual desire and want to win. It's a nice spot here for him. I think if you had to spare a thought for any player in this draw, it's Fucsovics having to probably play Andrei Rublev again.
Love it.
It's just, you just think about it. Of course, he was the closest seed to Rublev in this draw. Of course, it was going to pan out that way. But look, when you look at Rublev in his 8th of the draw, the other 3-seeded players are Fucsovics, who he's had the wood over, you know, Benoit Paire and Gurian. It's a pretty nice spot for him. You know, if it was maybe 2017, 2016, you could go, oh, well, Cilic is in there. Cilic is almost not ATP level at the moment. Something really needs to change there for him. I think all things being equal, this is a Karatsev-Rublev quarterfinal. And on what we saw last week. And look, this is one of those things. It's like I haven't been as high on Andrei Rublev, I think, as some other people have been. I didn't really like his comments around his match with Karatsev, like his pre-match comments before playing Karatsev. It didn't. He tried to kind of play himself off as the underdog, which is just ridiculous in the circumstances. He just didn't really kind of take control of the conversation or look confident in any way. I think Karatsev's the type of player that, you know, if he has the wood over someone, you only have to look at Ernest Golbus late last year, who got him 4 times in a row. It's, you know, it can be a tricky thing to overcome. So look, it's in this draw. I think Karatsev does appeal.
He's such a unique player, is Karatsev, in that, you know, we get some of these guys who, you know, in some sense burst onto the scene, but he's so much older and he has so much experience that I think that's played a massive role in him being able to sustain this level of form, right? This isn't a kid who's strung together a couple matches in a row. This is a guy who's been doing this at a number of levels for a very long time. And so it's, you know, as much mental as I think it is the quality of his game. And, you know, you mentioned some of these guys who he's been able to beat multiple times along the way, but I've been very, very impressed by the kind of mental consistency that he has shown throughout, because I do think, you know, when you get past the Djokovic's and the Nadals and, you know, the guys who aren't here, when you get past it, that next tier, that's the issue, right? You have guys who have immense talent, and for whatever reason, if the pressure is on, if they're all of a sudden a top seed in a tournament, if, you know, it's a longer tournament, keeping that consistent level, even in the course of one match, let alone a tournament, it can be difficult. It's the glaring weakness of that kind of next group. Maybe you could say maybe sans Medvedev at this point. And so I do think that mental strength that he has alone has really kind of catapulted him to being able to play to the level that he has throughout the course of 2021.
Yeah, I wonder if at this point, having played so long, that we're starting to have some fatigue build up. Yes, there's been some time in between tournaments. I also wonder how he reacts. I was flipping through this earlier, and again, I don't know the ITF tournaments and the Challenger stuff maybe as well as I should. I don't know when the last time he's played tennis in the United States is. He's never played an ATP match in the United States, so this will be his first time on these courts. And again, as I was starting to go back through, and I'm sure I missed maybe a Challenger tournament or two, I don't know when the last time he's played here. So I think it's a tough kind of travel spot for him. I wonder if the fatigue is going to build up. If Schwartzman is playing, I think he does have a little tougher section here than Rublev. Steve, like you said, I mean, Rublev walks to that section. And I think Karatsev does comfortably win all the matches in front of him. But, maybe Fabio Fognini feels like playing tennis this week and, and steals a set off. And maybe Schwartzman is back at some level and steals a set off, and that kind of stuff builds up. So I actually like Rublev to come out of here.
And two players that I will be keeping an eye on, and it's just kind of a look to the future, Sebastian Korda and Mazzetti as well, who are in here, maybe not the best conditions for them, but, in decent enough draws could potentially win, a couple of matches here. But yeah, look, in a similar way, like I said before, to John Isner being poor last week, Marin Cilic is a shell of the player that he was, even 2 years ago, just before his injury started to kind of pick up. It's been a little difficult to watch. So I'm fascinated to see how he goes against Correa, who probably won't make a lot of errors, but also won't be overly threatening at the same time.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this quarter, guys, before we jump into the fourth?
No, let's keep moving.
I like this quarter. This is probably one of the more talented quarters, in my opinion. You've got Shapovalov there at the top, Tsitsipas at the bottom, Demon Hours in the middle, a couple other interesting names. I'll start with you, Steve. I think there was a Canadian that stuck out to you here, maybe.
There is a Canadian here, except he has a two-handed backhand. I did mention before that, I am interested to see how some of the big servers go through this tournament. I think the conditions aren't the worst for them. When you look at the draw, Milos Raonic, it's a catch-22. Yes, his form hasn't been great across the start of the year. I know he lost to Novak at the Australian Open, but at the same time, it also means he hasn't played enough tennis to find himself in any sort of kind of physical distress. I generally don't like getting involved in his outrights because I don't trust his body to hold up. But I guess the fact that this tournament kind of spans over that week and a half or so gives a little bit more time, I guess, for him here. I don't think this draw is the worst. First round bye, either Thompson or Delbonis in the second round. Humbert's been hit and miss, and these probably aren't the best conditions for him. Could play the experience card against Shapovalov. And, when you look to the bottom, Tsitsipas is the biggest name to come out of that bottom section. And he hasn't always been fantastic against the bigger servers. So, something to consider there. But, I gravitated towards Milos here. But also, I am keen to see, and I hope that, Alex de Minaur can find a resurgence in form. If you think about how well he started 2021, he won Antalya before heading to Melbourne, and it's all kind of fallen away since then. So I'll be interested to see if he can make the most of his draw there. But look, I'm tipping Raonic to maybe get the better here of Tsitsipas in a quarterfinal.
How about you, Candace? What are you seeing in the final quarter?
Well, I do see Milos going through that top half of it. And I mean, the way that I see it, maybe even makes it easier for him. Steve had him going against Shapovalov. I don't even know if he faces him. I would be surprised if Hurkacz were able to make a little run through there, and Raonic should be able to handle him very easily if it happened that way. The bottom is very interesting to me. Again, similar thoughts towards de Minaur, hoping he can find that form and work a couple of matches together. But the one who I'm really intrigued by and going to be really watching is going to be Kei Nishikori. He should be able to kind of ease his way in, depending on who gets that qualifier with him, who's going to be playing Badin their first round, but that's nothing too overwhelming. Then after that, obviously potentially playing Tsitsipas. I mean, at his best, which we haven't seen for a long time, at his best, he should be able to be competitive with Tsitsipas there. And the thing with Kei this year is he's shown me some of his, not his very best form, but some improved form in patches. I was taken by his performance, in a couple of those matches in Dubai. I thought particularly against Goffin that he played very, very well. So you're starting to kind of see those signs that maybe he's coming back here a little bit. And so I think for me, I'm trying, and I've done this quite a bit in my betting life, but I'm trying to kind of jump ahead before he makes that obvious sign, because we're seeing those little flashes there. So I have Nishikori coming out the bottom. If he plays decently, he should be able to at least make it close with Tsitsipas. And when you have two guys whose odds disparity is going to be that massive, and I think it at least can be close, I'm always going to go with the dog. So I'll have Nishikori coming out of that entire section, because I do think if he makes it past Tsitsipas, it only gets easier from there for him.
Yeah, the bottom section is really tough. I mean, if you're Tsitsipas, you had to look at this and be really disappointed. Yes, you have a bye, but either Anderson with his serve or Montero just with his work effort is going to make him work there in that second match. Then it's probably Nishikori, then Demonauer, and I have a Canadian, but mine is the single backhanded Canadian. I like Shapovalov here. He's done very well in these courts before. I think he does have an actually easier section than Raonic does. Raonic is tough to put my finger on in this tournament because he normally is coming off a great week at Indian Wells when he plays here. As you start to go back through and look, he does very well at Indian Wells and then usually drops out in the first round or two here. And, part of that could be fatigue or something like that. So curious to see how he plays here, fresh, obviously, but just been a really tough year for him in general. I'm happy to kind of go against him. I think Shapovalov actually is going to be there and has a pretty good chance to win that match and actually sneak through this quarter, because I don't think Tsitsipas will be there. And if he is, again, whoever wins that Shapovalov-Raonic match is going to be a really appealing underdog in that quarterfinal.
Now, I'll set a market for you that's probably more interesting to Shapovalov than the actual tournament. Over under 1.5 running, jumping backhands ending up on the Tennis TV Twitter account across this 10 days.
That's tough. It's a good number because he's definitely one.
He's a good lines maker.
It's definitely one. Lean under, but I think over is a very interesting bet. I think over is a very interesting way to attack this versus like Shapovalov doing the quarter per se. Because, if he wins the quarter, there might just be enough matches where he does it. Who knows? That's just you need a couple matches.
Because I guess that's the thing, you look back to his last tournament. Yes, he did lose in the semifinal, but the round before he played a really good running, jumping backhand that looked really good on Instagram. So not all was lost for him last week.
As long as the dollars are coming in somehow, folks. Yeah, any other thoughts from you guys on this quarter or the draw in general before we jump through our picks?
Nope.
All right, Steve, who's up first? You're in charge here at this point with the banners.
I will start. Let's go, Candace. Who is your pick for the tournament? I think we already know because you may have.
I kind of let the cat out of the bag, but I'm going with Karatsev. I think on a match-to-match basis, since the start of the year, you'd be hard-pressed to find many guys who've been playing better than him, and Medvedev aside, they're not here. So I think he has a very nice little pocket to start his way into this tournament, and I do think some of the bigger names have more dangerous matches early on, so he might not even have to face all those guys. So Karatsev to win.
All righty. And Alex, who is your pick?
Same quarter, different player. I'm going to go with Andrei Rublev. I think this is the quarter to attack. It's the softest quarter in the draw. I think given what we just laid out for the fourth quarter, as much as, I think Shapovalov or Raonic, frankly, could have nice runs here. I think whether it be Karatsev, whether it be Rublev, whoever comes out of that third quarter is going to be favored there, and got to avoid Zverev and Medvedev and some of those bigger names there in the top half. So, I did mention that I would make Zverev my betting favorite, but as I look at my bracket, I look through the draw, I think Rublev probably has the best chance to win this tournament. So I'm going to pick Rublev.
Fair enough. Look at you two in the same quarter again, but not quite agreeing. We're back. I have settled on. I've gone down to the bottom, and like I mentioned when we were talking about the quarter, I've gone with Milos Raonic for a little bit of extra value. I think if you can find that range with his serve and find some consistency there. I think the conditions do suit. The draw isn't the worst for him, and I think he's a pretty decent price overall when you look at this as a ATP Masters 1000 tournament without the big names there, and he's on the other half of the draw to Medvedev. I think this is a good spot for him, and it's something that I'll be interested to see if he can actually take advantage of this portion of the draw. If we have a look at the value picks, I'll get mine out of the way first, just because I'm following on from Candace's. So my one is Karatsev. So I do agree there that I think there is value in this spot, as well as when you think about Rublev is the biggest threat in his quarter. I think when you look at it, it's all going to come down to his application. When you think back to Dubai, the other week he was in a third set, I think in the second round against Dan Evans, and was on the edge and on the brink a little bit, but found a way and then kind of took off from there. So I think, I'd rather get involved with him in the outrights than match to match here. So I've gone with Karatsev. How about you, Candace? Who have you gone with here? Candace is on mute, but I can pop her thing up onto the screen.
No,
It's always going to have
for.
I'm terrified by that reaction, given your cat's reaction to Karatsev. That already spells bad. So I'm going to have to rely on my value pick, I suppose, and that's going to be Feliciano Lopez. We spoke about it. We were talking about the top portion of the draw, but really looking towards, a player at a big price who has a nice big serve. Is he the player that he once was? No, but he's shown a decent enough form for me to entertain him against a couple guys in that quarter who I don't think necessarily always play well against some of the big serving foes. So we're going to go Feliciano Lopez.
Yes, sorry, I had to put myself on mute there. Obviously, the cat that I'm cat sitting at the moment is not particularly fond of your pick there. But look, I have gone down. I have gone down the cat sitting.
It's good to take
route. I think it's an ode to
the cat likes Medvedev. He likes favorites, clearly.
Yeah, exactly, clearly. And look, Alex, this is probably just a bit of an ode to spread as well. I don't have the cats jumping over me during streams, but there is certainly some noise being made outside. Probably
well,
wondering
you're still
what
a
I'm
singular
doing.
cat, which is good. Spread's a cats. Spread has, I think, one or two cats that don't really live with him. They just come and go as they please. We're checking in on him regularly.
Anyway, who's your value pick, Alex?
Denis Shapovalov. Again, I'll take my Canadian down there in the bottom. He was somewhere, I think, between 25 and 30 to 1 to win this tournament. Again, soft quarter from the perspective of basically he beats Raonic. I think he's got a comfortable chance to take care of Tsitsipas. He avoids all that kind of mess in the bottom half of the fourth quarter. Third quarter winner again. Tough match versus Karatsev versus Rublev. But I think he'll have his chances there at a 25 or 30 to 1 if he gets there. I'll be in good shape.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Now, we had one, between the three of us, we had one unforced error or one player that we were keen to avoid, and we've given this one to you, Alex, to discuss. I've added a second player in, but we'll get to them shortly. Alex, who's your unforced error on behalf of the team?
And to remind everybody of what kind of the general idea of this segment is, we're just trying to highlight players that we're looking to avoid and maybe just kind of give a pass on the week, whether it be from fatigue from a long couple weeks before, whether coming off an injury, whether kind of looking ahead, just somebody that, probably going to pass on them this week. So my unforced error was Diego Schwartzman, because it's tough. This tournament, as you start to pick through, there's not a lot of that stuff. I talked about some fatigue for Karatsev, but in all honesty, he's had a couple days since his last tournament, since we're starting on a Wednesday here as opposed to our normal Monday or even Sunday start time. You don't really have too many injuries. Just about everybody who's maybe injured pulled out already. So you start to look at maybe some look-ahead spots, and I wonder if there are some players in this field that are going to be looking ahead to the clay season. And I think Schwartzman is a good pick for that list. I wonder if someone like Guerin, looking kind of at his draw and the fact that he probably has to beat Rublev and Karatsev just to get out of his quarter here, might be looking ahead to some of those events. But I think Schwartzman specifically, as I go back and look, he's never really done well here or at Indian Wells. Generally has a couple short weeks and either goes to South America or Europe to play clay tournaments. So he would be my pick for someone that I'll be staying away from this week, not betting on for sure, given I think he's maybe looking ahead to dirtier courts.
He's got bigger fish to fry, but yep.
You trying to do greener pastures, but it's not grass season.
Yeah. No.
You have to make that stuff up on the fly.
It's certainly not Diego's best surface either. Look, I've added in a second unforced error. I'm just going to pop his name up on the screen.
You just want to say his name a bunch of times. Are you just proud you know how to pronounce it?
You can't let it go, Steve.
I just wish the ATP would just go we will pay you a first round prize money to just not turn up and give someone else an opportunity. Like, his protected ranking is holding on just because of COVID at the moment. I don't understand how he got to use his protected ranking for the Australian Open twice. I'm not sure how it's working. I mean, he's drawn Sam Querrey in the first round who, look, hopefully he can show up, but just give someone else a chance, please.
I don't know what you guys' coverage was like or if he ever was mentioned during the Australian Open. But I do know, at least here, the American commentators brought him up several times. Like, obviously in matches he wasn't playing because he was gone. But they were very, very upset about his protected ranking, and rightfully so.
I think that's
Anything
the thing.
to talk about something besides tennis. Love the coverage.
Yeah. Now, if we go to our overvalued players, we might start with you, Alex, and you can speak again on behalf of both of us because we both ended up picking the same player here. Who is your overvalued player?
Yeah, a little repetitive here. We've said it a couple of times, each of us. So Tsitsipas, this is tough. He's never really played well in this tournament. He's never played well in Indian Wells, which again is a good kind of comparator. Tough draw. Everything is pointing against him, and he's amongst the favorites here, single digits to win this tournament, which is laughable. Just absolutely no value in him at this number.
And look, I agree. It's probably not the best spot for him. And look, he will probably get a bigger server and a bigger player just to get out of the quarter. Then probably needs to beat Rublev or Karatsev to get through a semi. It's when you look at his odds, there just doesn't seem to be as much value there, I think, compared to some of the other big names at the top. Now, Candace, who is your overvalued player?
Well, before I get to it, I'll say I do not disagree with you guys at all. I think Tsitsipas is going to be a very common player for us. I would be surprised if he isn't going down the road for the year, because I do think after his performance in Australia and from what we saw from him even, the last maybe 2-ish years or so, he's finding himself in that dreaded spot of being like the next one, but he hasn't really done anything to warrant that yet. And those tend to be the players that tournament in and tournament out, the odds are just wretched. My overvalued player is a player who has proven himself, and that's going to be Daniil Medvedev. With the big names out, he was the obvious go-to as far as odds were concerned and favoritism is concerned. I just don't really have a barometer yet on him, aside from the majors and his ability to perform consistently and really have that desire. Obviously at this, he's much bigger fish than this. And even though there is prestige that comes with these Masters 1000s, I just wonder if, this is really all that important to him. He doesn't have the easiest draw for mine, and the odds are just, incredibly, incredibly short.
The only thing that stopped me from putting Medvedev there, and I'm just trying to bring it up again because I can't remember the specifics though. When you look at the rankings race, 1,000 points is going to be pretty handy in terms of bridging the gap to Novak. And the more that I look at the fact that Novak's playing a very, very reduced schedule, and you roll back through it, Medvedev lost in the round of 16 here in 2019. When you look at the ability to maybe get a significant chunk of points here, knowing that Novak's not going to be playing a hell of a lot, when you think about how well Medvedev ended 2020, that there is that potential there that if he were to play pretty well through to the end of the US Open, that he could legitimately be the world number one.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to get a little bit of a gauge as to how realistic he thinks that is, because this is a huge spot for him. This and the grass court season are really the opportunities here for him to be able to make a significant step. So that was the only thing that stopped me here, but I'm fascinated. And I do think that if he wins this tournament, that he will be world number one at some point in 2021.
Book it.
Done.
We'll save that clip for the end of the year.
Yeah, it'll probably be
for when
Karatsev.
he's like number 7 or something.
He'll be number 7. It'll be Karatsev and
This was
Zverev.
wins this tournament was the last tournament he played all year.
Yeah. Just take the rest of the year off. Alrighty, I think that brings the ATP preview to a close. Shall we move over to the women's draw?
Well, ready whenever you are, Stephen. Got to get those draws up here. We've got a pretty good draw. I know everyone complained about the men, but I was looking, all top 20 of the women are here. A bunch of other really fun names in. Again, we'll start at the first quarter. Ashley Barty is our 1 seed. Sabalenka, the 7th seed down there at the bottom. Again, a bunch of fun names here. I think this is a pretty solid quarter overall. We'll start with you, Candace. What do you see?
I see Ash Barty, who I'm not worried by at all. So easy to kind of pick up somebody and put them in there who's in that section with her, because we have no idea what you're going to expect from her, and I'm not going to expect it to be all that great. So I found myself leaning towards Victoria Azarenka in this section. Again, another person that we've seen some really nice flashes of, her really showing her ability over the last 6 months or so. People don't know. Steve and Alex are like private chatting back and forth. So all of these messages are popping in front of my face and they're being funny. I think they were trying to get me off kilter and it worked. But long story short, looking to Azarenka, I think she's the one to beat in this section. And it's as much of a play against Barty as it is a play in favor of her.
Yeah, Azarenka spread, who we mentioned earlier, reminded me, she was once quoted in some tournament saying, I'm from Florida. I don't live here. This is too cold. So should be comfortable here. Should love it. She has. She's won this a couple times. I think made the semifinals another time. And you start to look at the draw here. A lot of questions, Steve, about your countrywoman, Ashley Barty, in her first match, and I think about a year and a half outside of Australia. She has done well here. She is the defending champion, but I think that the kind of top half of this quarter defines the quarter. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting way for her to return to the tour. She was obviously so steadfast in not really participating in chunks of last year from a safety standpoint, and has then decided to return in Miami. I don't know, whereas, like Candace had concerns around Medvedev. Look, I have concerns around Ash Barty in that I don't think we're probably going to see through this next patch. Look, tennis isn't the be-all and end-all for her. I don't think we're potentially going to see the best from her. She obviously had that injury. Well, she said she had an injury. No, she said she didn't have an injury at the Australian Open and then lost to Collins in Adelaide and then cited an injury for missing tournaments. So it's hard to really know where she kind of stacks up here. Looking to the top chunk of this quarter, I gravitate towards Azarenka here. I think that's the more favourable section, considering how Angelique Kerber's played in 2021 so far. I wish there was a more attackable name in that third chunk that involves Bencic and Vondrousova, but I can't put Diaz, Venus Williams, or Wang into that bracket. Looking down to the bottom, Sabalenka, this is kind of testing me in my resolve of not getting involved with Sabalenka in tournaments that are quite big in terms of prestige. I think she's going to have a tough first match. I probably would be, Marta Kostyuk's played pretty well in 2021, but you can almost scratch out all her form up until the last couple of weeks, because she did have a positive COVID test and it hit her pretty hard and she hasn't been able to train for a couple of weeks. So I think then coming into Miami is going to be tricky for her. I don't mind Kudermetova to make a little bit of a run here, or Danielle Collins. But look, if I had to pick someone, I'd be going for Azarenka. I think she's got the game that causes trouble to Kerber, and then most likely Barty, and then most likely Sabalenka or Bencic.
I'm kind of curious, Steve. I'm going to be taking over Alex's role. Apologies. But what has the coverage of Barty been like there? Like, has there been talk of, well, is she even the real number one because she's not really playing? Like, what has the coverage been like about her there in Australia?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to answer this, because I don't want to say that there's been coverage, because there really hasn't been coverage.
Well, I was concerned about that part. Yeah.
I've read like 2 tennis articles, I think, in local newspapers since the Australian Open ended. And I think one of them was about Kyrgios breaking up with his partner, and the other one was Kyrgios getting back together with his partner.
Important stuff.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Sounds like tennis
Yeah.
covered shirt.
Yeah. So look, it's hard. And that's the thing, outside of, there are a couple of very, very good people in the media who will cover it. But, in terms of like the overall mainstream, it's just not really mentioned. And she probably won't feature a mention on any news services or in any papers unless she makes the semi-final here or better. So it's hard to kind of gauge it. For me, when you look at the rankings, this screams of she's losing grasp of the number 1 spot and needs to start doing something about it. And this is what she's doing. I think if she was another 1,000 or 1,500 points clear, I don't think she'd be here.
That's a good point. Again, she is defending all those points. It's tough. Any other thoughts on this quarter before we jump ahead, guys?
Let's keep moving on through.
Simona Halep at the top, Alina Svitolina at the bottom, Kvitova's in the middle. Just a fun quarter. Again, another solid quarter. This tournament, I think, is going to be very competitive. What do you see here, Steve?
Give me all of the Simona Halep. All of it.
No, I want some. You can't have it all.
This is the type of spot. So I'll just break it down. When you look at the unseeded players in here, go back 5 years, sure, we could probably have a more significant conversation about a lot of them. Garcia, Sevastova, even Siniakova, Konja, Krejcikova potentially, but she's playing Swiatek in the first round. Cornet, Kuznetsova. There's a lot of players that, yes, the names look strong, but they're not probably as strong as, in 2021. I don't see Coco having, when we go through the seeded players, I don't see Coco giving Halep grief. I don't see the winner of Swiatek versus Keys or anyone else in that section giving her significant grief, considering Halep beat Swiatek while she was injured in Melbourne. And you go to the bottom half of the section, Kvitova and humidity equals avoid generally. Joanna Konta is somehow seeded 17. Alexandrova is hit and miss, I think, and it's hard to catch her across, consecutive games or consecutive rounds of consistent tennis. And the other seeded play is Svitolina. Like, where I don't see, if Halep can bring a level somewhere near her best, it's tough to see. And when you think about Halep overall and then who's coming out of that first quarter, it just seems to be a pretty favorable spot for her.
Yeah, I agree. I think this sets up really nicely. There's a lot of, like you said, big names here that I'm not too worried about. Kvitova down there at the bottom is always problematic. She does very well here and in most tournaments. What do you see here, Candace?
I see that Candace.
Dang it!
Second time.
Oh.
Good. Yeah, you do it, so I don't have to do it this time.
I think Halep wins the section very, very comfortably. You guys kind of said it. I don't see any big minefields awaiting her in this spot.
Yeah, it's Halep or pass for me. She's just in a great spot here. So, any other thoughts here from you guys? I mean, we're all team Halep. That's good. Steve can't keep it all. Just to share some.
Again, a bit like with the men's when we were talking about that Fritz Tommy Paul section, at the time of us recording this, we've got Krejcikova playing Swiatek in the second round. I think that's a really interesting match compared to the quality of some of the other second rounds that we'll probably see here. And I think that might kind of shape up who Halep faces in that fourth round, because I don't think Madison Keys has looked good enough to justify, a deep run here. When you look at it, her best win was it Doha, Dubai, whichever one that Bencic had to fly from Adelaide to in like
Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, that I think that's her only real significant win, and she looked pretty average against Potapova last week. So I don't think you can make a case for her compared to years past. So look, it's if Halep wants it, I think Halep can have it.
Yeah, that's we're the all Halep show.
What
Eat,
Halep
sleep,
wants,
Halep.
Halep gets. You know what? If this was a soccer tournament, she would win too. I don't know if you guys saw the video of her playing soccer or football. Very
I
good.
saw that. I like that. Do you ever? I'm trying to remember who it was. It was Song and somebody. They were like kicking a tennis ball back and forth over a net for a while. It was very entertaining. I like the tennis players like soccer. I guess it's all footwork anyway.
Yeah.
Third quarter, the return of Bianca Andreescu. We hope. She hasn't withdrawn yet. Sophia Kenin down there at the bottom, and just another couple names there in the middle that I would love to pick to win this tournament, but they're all kind of stuck together. What do you see here, Candace?
You know, it's funny because I spent the bulk of the beginning of the year playing against Sophia Kenin over and over and over again. And to be frank, she hasn't really shown much form to make me lean in a different direction. But I'm going to do it because we're back in America and because I don't see a lot. Okay, let me revise that. I don't see a lot that worries me in this section here in Miami, right? Like, obviously, Garbine Muguruza has been on an absolute tear this year and always, I mean, she warranted respect even before that. I don't think anybody on the women's tour has beaten more players than she has this year. But we're in Miami. This is not a surface that I think really lends itself to her game. And if you're going to worry about fatigue with anybody, it's going to be someone like her. So if you're going to have to play her, I think this is the right time. And so with that in mind, I'm looking for a bit of a homecoming run from Kenin, who, aside from that, I don't see too much that worries me. You know, a lot of these players who are some of the bigger names have a couple of tough people to face early on before she'd have to meet them. And so you hope maybe a couple of those players take a set off of them or whatnot. But I think the fact that we're here in Miami, it kind of dims the light a little bit for me for Garbine. So I'll go over to Kenin.
Yeah, Muguruza hasn't had the same level of success here and even in Indian Wells as she had other places. How about you, Steve?
You look, very rarely do I buy on the dip in form of players, but I'm the same with Kenin here as well. And I think, you know, yes, you look at her last couple of matches out was the loss to Kanepi and the loss to Gadecki. I think it was in Melbourne. You know, the day after that loss to Gadecki, she was in hospital having her appendix removed. She wasn't particularly well in Melbourne. It wasn't an acute flare-up. It was that she was, you know, progressively becoming unwell, I guess, in those days leading up to there. So she wasn't in the right headspace. She did struggle, I think, being that, you know, that playing that defending champion role in Australia, and we haven't seen her since. I think, you know, she does do a lot of training, I think, in Florida. It's not the worst setup for her. So I think, you know, she should be able to make the most of that first chunk of the section. I reckon I've commented in previews on Jabeur about 15 times this year already that she needs to up her first serve percentage before I'm going to get involved in her on an outright. She'll probably
Don't worry, you can skip her. She's never made it past the second round here in Indian Wells.
No, but also she'll probably end up putting 75% of first serves in against Kenin now that I've said this so many times. You know, I think that Brady Rybakina potential match is an interesting one. But, you know, when you look to the top half, when you look to the top half of this quarter, it's a, you know, if Muguruza had to pick three other players to be, you know, seeded players to be in her section that she's closest to, you know, Petra Martic, who hasn't shown any form, Anisimova, who keeps delaying her return to the tour, and then Andreescu, who's kind of in a kind of, what are we calling this? Like
semi-retirement phase?
In like a second, it's like a second gear return to tour. I don't know. It's like a gentle return to work schedule.
Soft opening.
It's a soft opening, but I think that might come back to bite her from the quarterfinals onwards if she makes it through. I think Kenin's a good spot here. When you look at the odds, I think she's, you know, upwards of 30-1. I think it's just a good spot for her.
Yeah, it's the nicest spot of this quarter, but I worry she's probably going to have to play Brady and maybe Rybakina there. Then, like you said, Muguruza has a really easy path, and if Andriescu's playing well, then it's again Brady probably, and then Andriescu Muguruza just to get out of this quarter. I think you're right. There's probably a little value in her number at 30 or better, but I'm a little more hesitant. I'm going to wait and see how she does. I think there's just a couple other big names here that she's going to have to get through that I don't expect her to be favored over.
I think the biggest question with this quarter will be which qualifier ends up drawn to face Sloane Stephens, and will they start as a favorite?
Almost guaranteed. If they're not, we'll make it that way.
We will find a way.
We will find a way. We will get enough money down to change that number. All right, guys. Any other thoughts? Are we ready to jump into the fourth and final quarter of the women's draw?
I'm pretty happy to move on to what is another weird, strange, I guess, kind of good quarter in a way. I guess if you like Naomi Osaka, it is.
It's interesting, right? You've got Osaka and Pliskova there. Pliskova has done well in this tournament, Indian Wells before. Osaka, outside of that one Indian Wells run, has not. Some other names in here. Kontaveit is someone I generally fade, but some of my other tennis friends seems to think she'll do okay here or whatever. Pegula is great at the top. I like her quite a bit. What do you see here, Candace?
Not going to speak before I unmute myself for fear of retaliation on this show. It's boring. I like Osaka. I don't think that this is her best surface. I just see her making it through. You have a couple other women who I could see making a little bit of a run, someone like a Sakkari or Jessie Pegula. Kontaveit's slightly interesting to me, closer to Osaka in this draw. But again, I just see that these players, for the most part, are going to have to tackle each other before they even make their way to Naomi, who her first couple matches looks fairly comfortable. So I really wanted to go somewhere else in this quarter, and I found difficulty doing it. If you're going to make me pick somebody, it would probably be Maria Sakkari, but I think this is Osaka's to lose.
How about you, Steve? How do you see the final quarter shaking out?
I may have been a little bit cruel in my preview around Kontaveit. I think in this quarter, I did make reference that I generally prefer to support Kontaveit in the first half of a tournament than the second half of a tournament. But when she finds herself in an eighth with Mertens and Osaka, that kind of also goes out the window, and I just don't really know what to do with it at all. Like Candace, I don't mind Sakkari there in that spot. My big worry for her is Buzkova in that first match and what happens there. Pliskova is probably the player above all other players, I think, at the top of the game that has probably shown that the lack of prize money that's come over the course of the last 9 months looks to have probably knocked off some of her incentive or drive a little bit. She hasn't looked great against Pegula the last couple of times they've played, so that'll be an interesting one. And maybe slightly more favourable conditions for Pliskova, being a little bit slower, and if she does find a little bit more form off both wings. But it's hard when you sit down and you write about this or you talk about this section. It's very hard to make a case for Pliskova at the moment. Pegula, I think the conditions might be a little bit slow for her liking. Of the other seeds, as I said, Sakkari, Buzkova, that kind of puts me off getting involved with either. Kiki Bertens is, I think her goal in her first tournament back was to win a game, and she won 2, so go her. She's taking steps in the right direction. Elise Mertens, I've banned myself from getting involved with, so I'm stuck there. And then Kontaveit and Putintseva are tricky. I think I spoke about this on one of the other tournaments recently. This is Naomi Osaka's, I think, if she wants it. It just depends on the drive there and the desire. You know what you're going to get from her at a Grand Slam. You're going to get that top level. I'm just not entirely sold on her here. And I think when I look at it and I look what's going on, I think Potapova beats Tomljanovic in that first round. I think Potapova's a really tricky first up match if Osaka isn't quite switched on. So I want to kind of wait and see, I think, how that match unfolds before I kind of get involved with Osaka on an outright. I don't think the outright price will come in too much, I think, in the interim. But yeah, it's hard. I don't want to go confidently into Osaka and then have her produce, a pretty substandard effort in, which she can bring on at times, at a level below Grand Slam.
And that's kind of what I'm worried about. I think although her first match is kind of easy, Putintseva is going to make you work. Mertens is going to be there and kind of run her through a little bit. And I just like the spot for Pegula. I mean, she kind of owns Pliskova at this point. I mean, just beating the pants off for the last couple times. And like you said, maybe it's kind of a motivation thing. Maybe Pliskova's looking forward to, making a run here and getting a paycheck. But I've got Pegula actually running through this section here at the top. And, if Osaka's there, Osaka probably wins the quarter. I mean, she's the best woman tennis player on planet Earth. Or on hard court, she deserves to be the favorite. But I wonder if the pricing in the market necessarily makes sense. So I think Pegula is going to be some value, and she is kind of my name to run through here if I have to go with someone not named Naomi Osaka.
Yeah, and part of me not recommending Osaka from an outright to start is that I'm predicting that if Potapova does beat Tomljanovic, that there is going to be some absurd price thrown up for Potapova, who, can redline and maybe make a little bit of a push, when you look at some of the form that she's been able to produce. But if Osaka can handle that pretty comfortably and she's switched on from the start, I don't see Putintseva, Mertens or Kontaveit or anyone from that top part of the section really troubling her if she wants it.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Any other thoughts on the draw here, guys, before we jump into our picks?
Happy to jump right in. Do you want to lead off this time, Alex?
Yeah, sure. My pick to win, Simona Halep. Let's do it. Love her draw. Love her potential here in this event. Just an absolutely great shot for her. I've got her running through this whole thing. I think that the second quarter is very manageable, and whoever comes out of the top quarter will be someone that I'll definitely have her favorite over or be happy to back her against. So Halep, definitely my pick to win this tournament.
And mine is also Simona Halep. If you want my reasoning, just rewind about 12 to 15 minutes. And I feel like I gave a pretty good case then as well, as did Alex just then. Now, who's your pick, Candice?
I'm going to go with Sofia Kenin. I am buying low. I love the odds for her in this tournament. Coming back home, we know the type of ability that she has, and Steve did a good job of explaining maybe why we saw a little bit of down form from her in Australia amongst a number of reasons. So Sofia Kenin, you can find her just upwards of 30 from what I was saying, 30, 33-ish.
Yeah.
And you've gone with a little bit more confidence than me, but I've got Kenin as my value pick because she is sitting around that, I think, 32, 33 to 1. And I think, whilst the draw is difficult to start, I think, like we touched on, that, if she were to meet Muguruza in a quarterfinal, that's going to be a significant increase in opponent strength compared to what Muguruza is likely to get, in terms of player. I know there is quality names there in Anisimova and Andreescu. They just haven't played enough tennis, I think, overall to be able to sit here and confidently go, yeah, we're backing them on an outright perspective. I think those players you can look at from match to match, but from an outright perspective in that section, I think Kenin's the one.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Now, Alex, who have you got as your value?
Victoria Azarenka, again, has won this a couple times, played in the semifinals, going to love these conditions. I think we're getting a lot of value on her because she's stuck in the same quarter as Barty and Sabalenka, but she's as far away as she could be from those two players in these quarters. So we have a couple matches for Barty to maybe get knocked off, a couple matches for Sabalenka to get knocked off, and even if they're there, I think Azarenka, I'm just going to be backing her even more than I am. I mean, at 25 to win this tournament, I like her to win her quarter. Yes, she probably has to face Halep and might lose that match, but I'm going to be very happy if we have an Azarenka-Halep semifinal.
Definitely. Candice, anything to add?
No, other than, my picks and my value are a little confusing, I suppose. They're both sitting at very comparable odds. I think Azarenka's been around that 25 to 30-ish mark, and Kenin floating right around 30 as well. So I would just advise to really shop around and see if you can get around 30 for both.
And I think we're all kind of agreeing around these sections and around these plays. If I had a third player that I could pick here, it would be Azarenka. as well. So I think
If I had a third, it'd be Halep. So I get it.
so we've done well. This is very rare. We've obviously had too long off that we've come back and we're all agreeing on the same thing. But we shall see. Hopefully it comes out okay. Alex, do you have an unforced error for this tournament?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the last section, we talked about the ATP. Just kind of a tough segment given all the kind of things that have been kind of washed out here. But it's Ashley Barty. Again, she hasn't played a tennis match outside of Australia in a very long time. She is the defending champion here. So I think she's just got a lot of pressure on her, not only having to, again, come to the United States, deal with kind of all that travel stuff for the first time in a long time and try to defend all these points. Like you said, Steve, this is going to be really important for her. So I think there's just a lot of different little things that I'm going to look to avoid her this week and maybe give her a little bit of a pass.
And I'm in the same boat as well. I don't think if she were to be knocked out in the first couple of rounds, I'm not going to change my long-term opinion of Barty. I don't think, I think in the same way, you look at Osaka and maybe on the men's side, perhaps, those top players as well, they're at a level where, maybe the Grand Slams, you're going to get their best and you have to try and kind of pick your spots a bit with the way the world is at the moment and where they're traveling and what they're doing. So it'll be interesting to see if Ash brings a level better than what we saw from her in Melbourne. Obviously she does like the conditions here. She was dominant here in 2019, but it is hard to make a case. Now, Candice, I haven't skipped you. You didn't have an unforced error, did you? Just before
I didn't.
But
I'm just going to steal ours anyway.
Do you have an overvalued player following along similar lines to what we've just been discussing?
I mean, it just happens to be Ash Barty. I was pretty stunned when I was looking at the odds for this tournament earlier, over the weekend, and I saw her in single figures. That's insane to me. I get maybe you have to protect yourself a little bit because she's won the tournament before, but I mean, I could probably. I don't want to be mean, but I probably would pick 10 other players to win the tournament before I would pick Ash Barty. So I couldn't get down with those odds.
That's a big call. 10.
Should I make a list down here and then put it up?
Trying to think. I don't know if I could get to 10, but it's a lot.
You could probably get to 5 very easily.
You know what?
We all picked Azarenka. We all picked Halep.
Yeah, we already have 3 right here.
I'd actually
have Muguruza at the bottom, Osaka.
And you know it's getting grim if I'm starting to think whether Mertens and Svitolina are probably above her on the list as well, considering my thoughts on them in the outright world.
Don't do it.
Anyway, who's your overvalued player, Alex?
My overvalued player here is Garbiñe Muguruza. She is, I think, second or third favorite here to win this event. Again, single digits herself. As I start to look at her spot in the draw, the first couple matches are kind of easy, but it looks like it's going to be Andreescu and then Brady or Kenna just to win the quarter, followed by possibly Osaka just to get to the finals, where I'd be happy to pick either Azarenka or Halep or even Barty or Sabalenka, whoever is there. It's just a murderer's row of a draw for her. And I think as you start to put together what some of those prices are going to look like, you're going to be able to do much better just playing her match to match than you will at that 7, 8, 9 to 1 price. I can't, something in that range. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but anything in single digits is kind of preposterous.
Yeah. And following along similar lines, look, my overvalued is Petra Kvitova. I've pretty much opposed her every time there's been humidity since 2014. I'm probably ahead even if she does win this tournament. It's one of those ones I don't think this is quite the conditions for her unless she shows some really blistering form and just blows everyone off the court, which, look, she might. But looking at the odds and looking at the strength of this draw, I'm happy to look elsewhere. Now, just before we do wrap up, so obviously we're recording this at the time that the women's qualifying is going on at the moment. So there are a number of players, and the same with the men's, that will be placed into the draw. If I just list off the players that have already made it through qualifying, Bolsova, Peronkova, Samsonova, Dodon, Martinkova, Kakova, Zarazua, Daniljevic, and Baptiste. Do you see any of them being significant threats?
I need you to repeat the names again for me to know. Go ahead.
Bolsova. No. If I had to pick two, I would go Poronkova, given her form at the US Open last year. Would you go Samsonova or Dodan? Maybe is the next one.
I'm going Dodan.
Mhm.
Dodan, I think, has a little more power to her game, and I'm a little disappointed I didn't back her. I mean, she was disappointing in Lyon, but it just ended up being kind of a funky tournament. Again, we talked about a big hitter, a strong server. I think that'll be good. But yeah, out of the list you picked, that was Dodan was top of my list. I'm hoping that Coach Areta here gets the third set. She would be another pick. I think that she has a nice game for these situations. So expect either one of them. I think would be kind of my two picks on the women's side.
Definitely. Well, I think that wraps up the women's side. We're back. We survived.
So much agreement. I don't know what to
We
do
did.
with myself now. I wanted to fight.
It was a little agreeable. We were pretty egregious here in our first joke back in a while.
Group
That's not how
hug.
to use egregious, by the way.
And
No. Like A-G-R-E.
I'll figure out something. We might put it up on our socials around that Denis Shapovalov highlight over under.
Yeah.
Let me frame a market.
Follow that.
I'll frame a market for the two of you, and we can figure out something and maybe end up with some sort of donation to charity or something.
I like that. It's a good idea.
Let's see what we can do there. I'll try and come up with something across the course of today. But thanks everyone for tuning back in. Obviously it's been a little while since our last full preview. Make sure you do follow us, and probably the one place, particularly if you do like the video portions of our shows, is to make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Eat Sleep Tennis Show. Just because I think Periscope is wrapping up in the next couple of days, I think, on Twitter. So that's probably the best place to catch the video portions of what we're doing. But also we're on all the standard podcast platforms. So if you just do search for Eat Sleep Tennis, it should come up with our little logo there that's behind all of our heads. But otherwise, thank you very much to everyone who has tuned in live or is listening to this back on a podcast. Any last words from the two of you?
All good.
No.
No, I was going to mute Candace then and then say she's not saying anything. But
Oh, that would be mean.
I'm not that mean. I'm not yet. Next time, and yeah, we'll be back soon with our next episode. Until then, look after yourself, and hopefully you can back a winner or 10, or hopefully, based on all of our thoughts, go Halep.